The human mind recoils at the notion of a building designed for but one purpose: to efficiently dismantle the lives trapped within its walls. But in the final years of the 19th century, at the corner of Wallace and 63rd Street in Chicago, such a place stood a monument to one man's bottomless avarice and cruelty, its very bricks and mortar seeming to whisper a warning that was tragically never heeded in time. This is the story of Herman Webster Mudgett, a man who would etch his name into infamy as H. Holmes, and the labyrinth of death he called his castle. Our story begins not with a monster, but with a man of disarming charm. Herman Mudgett was born in New Hampshire, a bright boy with an unnerving fascination with medicine, and, as local legend would have it, a childhood-forced confrontation with a human skeleton that cured him of a fear of doctors. He carried that lack of fear into his adulthood, pursuing a medical education at the University of Michigan. It was here, amidst cadavers and clinical texts, that the first flickers of his true nature emerged. He embarked on a series of grisly frauds, stealing corpses, mutilating them, and staging accidents to collect on insurance policies. This was his apprenticeship in deception, a prelude to the grand horror he would later orchestrate. After a brief, tumultuous marriage, he fled his old life, emerging in Chicago in 1886 under the new, respectable name of Dr. H. Holmes. Chicago, in the late 1880s, was a city of roaring industry and grand ambition, a perfect hunting ground for a man like Holmes. The World's Fair was coming, the world's Columbian Exposition, promising to draw hundreds of thousands of visitors to the city. Holmes saw not a celebration of human progress, but an endless stream of potential prey. He took a job at a pharmacy in the Inglewood neighborhood, and with slick talk and forged references, he soon owned it. The owner, an elderly widow, simply vanished, and Holmes produced a document showing she had deeded him the business. It was a pattern that would become chillingly familiar. Next to the pharmacy was an empty lot. Holmes, with the fair looming, envisioned a grand hotel to lodge the influx of tourists. He began construction on a massive 3-story building, a project that would consume years and a rotating cast of architects and workers, none of whom ever saw the full plans. This was the birth of the Murder Castle. The castle was a physical manifestation of Holmes's twisted psyche. From the street, it appeared as a large, if somewhat oddly proportioned, commercial block with shops on the ground floor and hotel rooms above. But behind that conventional facade lay a maze of sheer madness. There were over 100 windowless rooms, doors that opened onto brick walls, stairways that led nowhere, and corridors that coiled in upon themselves. Holmes installed soundproofed rooms lined with asbestos, some equipped with gas jets that he could control from his own office, allowing him to asphyxiate occupants at will. There were secret chutes that led directly to the basement, a dissection table, a crematorium, and pits filled with quicklime. The very architecture was a predator, and Holmes was its master. Into this web walked Julia and Pearl Connor. Julia was the young, beautiful wife of a jeweler who rented a shop in the castle. Holmes, ever the charmer, soon seduced her, making her his mistress and installing her as his bookkeeper. For a time, she was enthralled by the sophisticated doctor. But then she became pregnant. She demanded he divorce his second wife, a woman he had bigamously married, and marry her. Holmes agreed, but said it had to be a secret. He promised her a special abortion, a procedure he, as a doctor, could perform safely. Julia Connor and her young daughter, Pearl, walked into one of the soundproofed rooms and were never seen again. Holmes calmly told inquiring neighbors that Julia had moved away. He had perfected his method: charm, entrapment, and then the seamless, silent disappearance. The World's Fair arrived in 1893, and the castle filled with young single women drawn to Chicago for work and adventure. Many checked in, but few checked out. Among them was Emmeline Sigrande, a stenographer who inherited a small sum of money. She took a room in the castle and vanished. There was Minnie Williams, a vivacious and somewhat naive heiress from Texas who fell deeply in love with Holmes. He bigamously married her, convincing her to sign over her property to him. She, too, disappeared, along with her sister Anna, who came to Chicago looking for her. Holmes's confidence grew with every successful murder. He was a spider, and the castle was his web, trembling with fresh victims. He sold skeletons to medical schools, the bodies meticulously stripped of flesh, their origins unquestioned. The business of murder was, for a time, terrifyingly profitable. But the sheer scale of his schemes eventually outstripped his cunning. The castle was a money pit, and Holmes's financial machinations, forging deeds, taking out loans under false names, and running elaborate insurance scams, began to attract the wrong kind of attention. One of his most audacious plots involved a simple-minded assistant named Benjamin Petzel. Together, they planned to fake Petzel's death in a Philadelphia laboratory explosion, so his wife could collect a $10,000 life insurance policy. The plan was for Petzel to go into hiding with a cadaver posed as his own. But Holmes had a different, more final solution. In September 1894, he met Petzel in Philadelphia. Soon after, a body was discovered in the lab, so badly burned it was identifiable only by a distinctive mustache. The police declared it an accident, and the insurance company, though suspicious, prepared to pay out. Holmes collected Petzel's wife, Carrie, and 3 of her children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, and began a bizarre cross-country journey, telling them their father was in hiding. This journey would become his undoing. The insurance company hired a dogged private investigator, Frank Geyer of the Pinkerton Agency. Geyer's mission was simple: find Benjamin Petzel and prove the fraud. But as he followed Holmes's trail, a far more horrifying truth began to emerge. He tracked Holmes and the Petzel family from Philadelphia to Cincinnati, to Indianapolis, to Detroit, and finally into Canada. In Toronto, Geyer made a grim discovery. In a rented house, buried in the cellar, he found the bodies of 2 young girls. They were Alice and Nellie Petzel, strangled to death. The search intensified. In another rented home, this one in Irvington, a suburb of Indianapolis, Geyer made an even more heart-rending find. In a shallow grave beneath the kitchen floorboards, he discovered the body of little Howard Petzel. Holmes hadn't just killed their father. He had systematically murdered 3 innocent children, simply because they were inconvenient witnesses. The manhunt was international. Holmes was finally apprehended in Boston, attempting to pull another insurance scam. He was initially held for the Petzel murder, and as he sat in Philadelphia's Moyamensing prison, the full horror of the Chicago castle began to leak out. Reporters descended on Englewood, and the Chicago police, belatedly and with great embarrassment, began to excavate the labyrinth. The public's appetite for the macabre was insatiable. The Philadelphia Inquirer secured a series of sensational and largely fabricated confessions from Holmes, who seemed to relish his newfound notoriety. He claimed to have killed 27 people, then over 100, then 200, his ego inflating the body count with every interview. The press dubbed him the arch-fiend of the age. The truth was likely more prosaic but no less monstrous. Most historians agree he murdered between 9 and 27 people, the exact number lost to the castle's efficient disposal systems and his own labyrinthine lies. The trial of H. Holmes was a media circus, a 19th-century precursor to the sensationalized court dramas of today. The evidence was overwhelming, particularly concerning the murder of Benjamin Petzel. The prosecution presented a chillingly meticulous case, detailing the insurance fraud and the subsequent slaughter of the children. Holmes, acting as his own attorney, was strangely subdued, his once formidable charm failing him in the face of such cold, hard facts. He offered wild, shifting defenses, first claiming Petzel had killed himself, then that one of his accomplices had murdered the children. No one believed him. The jury took just a few hours to find him guilty of murder in the first degree. The judge sentenced him to death by hanging. In the days leading up to his execution, he gave one final, rambling confession, a document as full of lies and half-truths as his life had been. He showed no remorse, only a clinical interest in the proceedings. On May 7, 1896, the trapdoor opened beneath H. Holmes. Fearing his body would be used for medical experiments or stolen, he had requested his coffin be filled with cement and buried 10 feet deep. Even in death, he was constructing one final impenetrable chamber. The castle, that terrible monument to his crimes, did not long survive him. It became a morbid tourist attraction for a brief, ghoulish period before a fire of suspicious origin gutted the structure in 1895. It was later demolished, the lot left empty, as if the very earth itself had rejected the evil that festered there. The story of H. Holmes is more than a catalogue of gruesome murders. It is a stark lesson in the banality of evil wrapped in the guise of ambition, a reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not the ones who lurk in shadows, but the ones who smile, shake your hand, and confidently sell you a ticket to your own doom. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.